It is better to debate a question without settling it than to settle a question without debating it. Joseph Joubert, French moralist and essayist. All right. Welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, then I want to especially thank you for giving me your time so early. Last night, hopefully you saw it, David Hogg, the it would seem a very anti-gun kind of guy. He kind of came across differently in the debate. He debated Spike Cohen on the issue of guns. It wasn't especially spirited, so it was just more of like a debate with the tone of a conversation, which is fine. No issue there. And today I want to talk about what we can learn from it. So here's my thing. It's great that somebody like Spike Cohen is out there getting in these debates. It's great that we see people like Dave Smith going out and doing debates and getting on, different media podcasts and whatnot. We need more of that in the liberty community. We need all of us, anybody that's willing, let me put it this way, anybody that's willing to put their voice out there, to step out there and face the crowd, anybody that's willing to do that, we need those people too. And we need to develop ourselves in a way that makes people want to invite us. People want to invite Dave Smith and Spike Cohen and so on and so forth. They want them to come on their show and talk about these things because the guys speak very well. They're knowledgeable about what they talk about, right? They're respected in the community. We need more of those. So the essence of this afterthoughts is really for that purpose. I'm not gonna I could go through and say, all right, well, so and so said this, but I think that's a little unfair. I've got a little bit of that, but I think it's a little unfair to do that, especially since I'm going to be so biased towards Spike Cohen. So I'm clearly I'm going to give I would be more fair. I would be a little bit unfair in a positive sense towards Spike, but more negative sense toward David. So I don't think it'd be fair to do that. So I'm not going to go through and pick apart everything that they said. That would be kind of silly. What I am going to do is I'm going to talk about kind of like what I think their best moment was and what I think, uh, what we can learn from different points in the conversation. So let's get started. Before we do all that, though, before we decide who did well here and there and whatnot, let's just watch who kind of stole the show. Not on purpose, but if you saw it, you know that she stole the show. And I mean that in a very positive sense. This is a woman named Lily Tang Williams. She came here when she was 23 from communist China, and she's a vociferous advocate for freedom here in the United States. So let's play. This was during the Q&A section when when they had the audience members line up and then ask questions. So this is what Lily Tang said.
So my question to you, David, is that can you guarantee me, a gun owner tonight, our government in the US, in DC, will never become a tyrannical government? Can you guarantee that to me?
There's no way I can ever guarantee that any government will not be tyrannical.
Well, then the debate on gun control is over, because I will never give up my guns. Never. And you should go to China to see how gun control works for dictatorship of CC.
Okay. So that was the clip there. And I think that was a pretty memorable moment. And basically what she said is like, look, let's break this all down. Let's cut the chase. We have established that the purpose of the Second Amendment was for citizens to defend themselves against tyrannical governments. There's nothing in history that says otherwise. And so at the end of the day, can you, as you are arguing in favor of more gun control, can you make this promise? Can you guarantee that what I experienced in China won't happen here? And the right answer is no, he cannot. And then I think she rightfully said, well, then it's over. Why are you arguing? Because if you can't, everything you're doing leads me closer and closer to that moment that I've already experienced, that I came here so I don't have to experience again. And I think it's a pretty powerful message. And now the unfortunate nature of it is somebody like myself who was born and raised in the United States, I cannot make that argument. Only somebody like Lily Tang could make that argument. Only somebody who's come from a country where they don't have these kind of freedoms, where you have a government that has been tyrannical in their lifetime. Only somebody like that can really say. So we need to advocate or elevate those voices when we hear them, so that people get the sense of what it is that they're actually doing when people are pushing for gun laws. That's ultimately what they're doing. They're putting us a little bit closer to the fact that maybe our government might become more tyrannical. And I think they really need to understand, and I don't think they do. But these are the kind of stories that we need. And I'm glad that she did this, not just because it was a nice dunk. I mean, we all like a nice dunk, right? Come on. But I like it because all too often in the libertarian community, we get bogged down in facts and data and, information. And I think we sometimes forget that we're talking to real people, and we need to use some of our own stories and emotion. And I know you're not going to like it, but in a sense, we do got to appeal to people's emotion. Now, we shouldn't do it haphazardly, but we should. And I think Lily shows exactly how you can appeal to emotion in a sense, and factual, because she really did experience that, and she could tell you all about it. And then you could go back in history and you could look and say, yep, those kind of things actually did happen. Right. So it's a simultaneous appeal to emotion while being rooted in fact. And I think the biggest problem when it comes to appeal to emotion is that a lot of times they're not rooted in fact. And so we need to do a combination of appealing to people's emotion, because humans are humans. That's how they respond. And we need to make sure that we're rooted in fact. So I think Lily was the unintentional star of the show. It was a great comment. And if you like, I've heard from, I know who Lily Tang is. I've seen some of her other videos and commentary, and she's got a pretty powerful story. So if you don't know who she is for some reason, go ahead and check her out. I think she's also running for Senate up in New Hampshire as well. So that was pretty neat. All right, so let's move on. Let me, I was thinking like maybe I'll do the best and their worst. And then I was like, let me do it this way. Let me present to you what I think was the best comment from each one of the two gentlemen, from both David and from Spike. And then after that, I want to address some things in the context of how can we, as libertarians and members of the liberty community at large, how can we better go forward and be prepared for debate? Before I do that, I want to address Dartmouth. I think they did a great job. I'm glad that they it was a Dartmouth political union. I'm glad that they went ahead and put this debate on. I think that was great, and I hope they do more of these. I'm going to offer a little critique. Their microphones, I think they need to work on that a little bit. There was points in the debate where I was sitting there on the couch and I was watching it and I had to like turn it up because it was hard to hear. And we're not talking about somebody from the audience talking and just not being picked up by the mic, but like sometimes the mic would go up and down. So I think, make sure that you work on that because in this day and age, like that's a big deal. Like every joker out there has a podcast with several hundreds or thousands of dollars worth of equipment, and so if you're a bigger organization, you should definitely have not only good equipment, but it should be functional in a way where that distraction doesn't happen. The other thing that I noticed, and this was more particular at the beginning, is that I'm not sure if the debate format was presented to both David and Spike. It seemed at the very beginning like it wasn't because they were asking like, how much time do I have? And it seemed like they weren't clear that they were given 2 minutes. And the timer, I noticed at one point, the gentleman who was moderating, his timer was his cell phone, which is fine. However, if I've got somebody on the right and on the left of me, and I'm using my cell phone as a timer, and maybe they're just trying to, keep an eye on the time while they're talking, I think it makes for a distraction. You can see at the very beginning, they're kind of like, they're looking over, they're like, hold on, I'm just checking to see what my time. Well, if you have 2 minutes and you spend 5 seconds of it stopping to see what your time is, and then another couple of seconds getting back on track, I think that takes away from your time. So I would recommend that they have like a timer or something that's a little bit more visible to the two participants so they can see with ease, maybe something larger like a large clock that they can hit, something like that. That way they have a more visible reference, but they don't have to constantly interrupt their thought because they've only got 2 minutes. And in 2 minutes, it goes by very, very quickly, especially when you're talking about a hot topic like gun control and you've got all this information in your mind and you're trying to compact it into 2 minutes. That's a lot harder than it might seem. And I've been in that situation where somebody asks you something, you only got like 1 or 2 minutes to respond. And you're like, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I got all this information. Now I gotta figure out on the fly how much of that I can get in 2 minutes and then, which parts of it and then get it out, like literally get it from my brain to my mouth. And you've only got like 2 minutes. Might take you the first 10 seconds to really get a good flow going. And you wouldn't want to get interrupted by trying to look and see, okay, am I at 1 minute or 1 minute and 30 seconds? Because if you're at 1 minute and you're at 1 minute, then you can mentally say, I need to start winding down. If you're at 1 minute and 30 seconds, I've only got 30 seconds. Let me really quickly wind this down because if you get to the end of your 2 minutes and you're only halfway through, then your point could be lost entirely. So I think to the benefit of the two, David and Spike who are debating, or anybody for that matter, having a visual reference is very, very useful. And I would recommend that if you're putting something on. And you can get away with it in some cases where the answers are more like, all right, what would you do in this scenario? And there's not really expected a lot of debate back and forth or disagreement, right? Like, and it works a little bit better there. But when one participant knows that the other participant's probably going to disagree, or they're trying to make a really good point that will challenge the other participant so that they will be kind of thrown off, I think a visible time reference is very useful. So that's all I'll say about that. But those are critiques in a very positive sense. I'm not like slamming Dartmouth political union. Like I think it was great. They had great camera shots and stuff like that, and the audio was generally pretty good. So kudos to them. I think they did a good job, and we should all kind of reach out and thank them for the debate. because the more that organizations like this see that we participate and we watch it, and then we're thankful for it, the more they're going to want to do it. So, all right, so let's move on. Let's start with Spike's best comment. I love this comment, and I'm glad that this actually was at the very beginning, and so I'm glad that he just ran right out of the gate with this one. So let's listen in.
From the very moment of the beginning of your existence, you have rights that are not supposed to be infringed upon by anyone. We call them natural rights. Two of those rights are the right to defend yourself and others, and the right to own justly acquired property. You're allowed to buy things and own them. You're allowed to make things and own them. You're allowed to have people give you things and own them. And so what that amounts to is that you have a pre-existing natural right to keep and bear arms for the defense of yourself and others. We are one of the few countries, I believe the only country, that actually affirms this pre-existing natural right and forbids any government at any level from infringing upon it.
Okay. What I love about this is he sets the stage for virtually every answer that he gives. He's like, look, you have this natural right to self-defense, and you've got a natural right to property, right? Like he just like lays every answer that he gave after the fact could be, is rooted in that. And so he laid it out. The other thing that I really like about it, we as libertarians, and this is actually, I'm speaking to the libertarian community, but this actually applies to any community. People like to use their jargon, and we have to be mindful what jargon to use and when. So he didn't say, like he didn't say something like, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. He didn't use any terminology that would be more understood by libertarians. He just said it in plain English. He was like, "Look, you have the right to self-defense. You have the right to justly acquired property." Right? Like these are just simple concepts in simple plain English that anybody in the room can understand with having no knowledge whatsoever of libertarian ideology, right? Or philosophy. It wasn't necessary. And so he doesn't have to explain any of the jargon, right? Because he just said it in plain English. We need to learn to do that. You will find when I'm talking to people, I almost never use jargon that's very common in libertarian circles. Now, I might use it when I'm talking to other libertarians, but as a rule of thumb, I just don't use it unless I really need to. And then sometimes I will point out, like if I need to use a word, I will point out, I will say the word, and then I'll follow it up briefly with, that means this, right? That way, whoever I'm talking to is maintaining understanding of the conversation. And I've seen people do this in all different, if you go to, like, I've seen it in real estate groups, I've seen it in technology, I've seen it in the church. When I was involved in the church, we used to call it Christianese, right? You would go out and you would use all this lingo, and people are like, okay, what does all that mean? And it wasn't very useful. And then you had, so then you just basically had to repeat everything that you just said, but in different words. And so it was a total waste of everybody's time. So I really appreciate that he, right out the gate, told us, the foundation for every one of his answers. And he didn't really say like, this is the foundation of every answer, but that's effectively what it was. All right. So let's take a look at David's best. Now, David's best actually comes toward the end. And I think it summarizes his position and what drives him. And I think this is actually in both cases, Spike and David's, it's useful for people to understand the foundation of the other person's argument. When you understand the foundation of it, and I mean truly understand it, then yes, you can actually speak and potentially have an opportunity to sway them. But if you don't understand the foundation of the argument, you're probably just going to be talking past them. So here's David's best. Oh, no, it's not. Hold on. Let me see here. What happened? Give me just a second here. Why are you? Let's try it again.
What I would like to end on is like, look, I'm not, I feel like there's this sense that has been created since Parkland that I'm some kind of totalitarian that wants to take everybody's, like, I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy that doesn't want what happened in Parkland to happen again. Do I have all the answers to that? No, I'm not going to act like I do. Have I been wrong in the past? I definitely have. I'm sure Spike will admit that he's been wrong in the past on different things.
On occasion.
At times, right? I bet times. And what I'm getting at is that I think that the current course that we've been on throughout American history of just having the same answer where we put more guns into this situation, I don't agree that that's necessarily the right answer. Now, I don't think that that means that there shouldn't be any guns in our society, nor do I think that would be logistically, constitutionally, or practically possible, even if I was advocating for that. But what I am saying is I think it's time for us to do something different. God forbid. Because I think the current reality that we face right now, the reality, not the hypothetical, but the reality of gun violence in America being at such a high rate is something that can't just be addressed by addressing the systemic problems that drive it. We also need to address the fact that somebody like the shooter at my high school is still able in many states to get a gun like the AR-15, despite threatening to shoot up a high school.
Okay. So I think the foundation for David's argument, his whole position is really like, look, I'm looking around. I was involved in some way. Yes. He's like, I was involved in this incident, and I've seen incidents happen after the fact, and it pains me. I want to do something about it. And a lot of people, that is the driver for a lot of people. Take any organization, right? And a lot of the people have personally been affected by the organization that they're involved in. Spike has MS, and a lot of people that contribute to MS have a loved one that has MS, and that's what motivated them to get involved. And you can look at it, virtually any other organization, and they're the same thing. You find that a large number of the people that get involved are people that have been personally affected in some way. And so this is David's driver, it seems. And it would seem, I don't believe that he is, I think he's correct. I think it's a fair take to say he is not the tyrant that he is presented to be, not in the real sense of a tyrant. And I mean, somebody that knows they're a tyrant and says, we've got to do this because I don't like this. I think you can separate the types of tyrant. The kind that literally are just going to be a tyrant, and then the kind that effectively become a tyrant because they're trying to solve a problem that has personally affected them. And I think he's the latter kind. Now, in some ways, that can be the more dangerous kind, but in some ways, I think that's the more advantageous for us as those who would oppose their ideas, because that means there is something to appeal to, right? There is a sense of, hey, if we can solve this problem without going to that level, would you be willing to accept it? And I think there's a bigger chance that they would, the tyrant who is just trying to solve a problem that has personally affected them versus the person who is a tyrant to be a tyrant. Because the person who's being a tyrant to be a tyrant, what are you appealing to? They just, they're just trying to dominate people. And so I think there's a certain fairness in what he's saying, and I'm willing to accept it. And I think this is the point in the debate where he's probably the most honest with people. When he's like, look, I'm just a guy. I don't want to see this anymore. And it pains me. And I'm sure of that. I know we criticize him and, were you really right there? Were you close enough and all that good stuff? But at the end of the day, he knows, he went to school, he laughed and went out with some of the students that were killed, right? Like, he knows them personally. And that's a rough thing at 17 to, to be even in the proximity of violence and find out that your friends have been killed. That's a rough thing to happen to anybody. And so I would expect that, yeah, he wants to do something about it. But again, a lot of times when people want to do something, I think they lose their sense of rationality, because it's like anything will work. And then if you listen to his answer, he's like, look, it seems like the trajectory that we're on is just getting worse and worse and worse. And I don't have the clip of it, but at one point, Spike does point out that a lot of our gun violence that we're seeing, the mass shootings that we're seeing, largely started around the 60s. You didn't really see that prior to the 60s. It just didn't really happen. And so Spike's point throughout the debate was like, there's something else. It's not the guns. And the thing about the gun advocates or the gun prohibitionists is that they believe superficially that it is the guns that are the problem. And so it's our job as, defenders of the Second Amendment and people in the liberty community, it is our job to figure out what kind of argument does it take to reach them and show them that no, your path isn't the answer because it's not going to solve the problem you're trying to solve. And you're just going to keep chasing your tail. And in order to do that, we need them to be at their most honest so they can tell us where they really are. We need to be mindful and not mock them, right? And say, okay, I hear where you are. Let's address that. And this would go into probably my biggest criticism of Spike. I love Spike. I think he's a great guy. He's a great orator for sure. The one challenge that I had is it felt like he came with so much data that it was like the guy with data arguing with the guy who came with, personal stories in a sense, and so there's like two different people and it didn't seem like either one of them were really prepared as well as they should have been for the other. David was clearly not as prepared to deal with the data. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. As he should have been. He was clear. I mean, it was obvious throughout that he was not familiar with the data. And so he was ill prepared there. And then I think Spike was so prepared with the data that he wasn't quite as prepared to have the conversation at a more heartfelt level. And not to say that he can't. I mean, Spike totally can. I've met Spike many times, very familiar with his work. I know that he can, but this is, of course, a debate scenario. This is a situation, this is a debate environment where I think it lends to being one or the other. And both of them had acknowledged multiple times throughout the debate, they wish it had been maybe a little bit more long form environment, because then they could have had a little bit better conversation. And I think you have to really prepare very diligently to be able to do both when you're in a debate like this. Because if you give me 2 minutes, of course I want to tell you all the facts, right? Like that's the easiest thing to get out rather than try to tell you a story. I mean, how many stories can you tell in 2 minutes? And it's very difficult, but we do need to have a combination of both of those. And so it can be a challenge. Now, I'm glad that both of them did debate. And so none of this criticism is to suggest that either one of them did bad. I wouldn't say that. I'm just, what I'm talking about is I'm like, all right, as I'm watching, how do we as a community get better the next time? How do we present ourselves even better than we did the last, right? And everybody has an opportunity for improvement. So that's all that is. All right, let's talk about some data here, because I'm calling it Chartgate. And if you watch the video, if you watched it, you know what I'm talking about. So this next clip is actually several clips kind of put together, and just to kind of give you a sense of what was going on here. So let's play this clip. This is what I'm calling Chartgate.
So what it turns out is that this is a chart. I don't know if you guys can see this, but in this chart, I hope you all have eagle eye vision. Those at home may be able to see it. This is the number of guns per people, or rate of gun ownership by in that state, and this is the this is the gun murder rate. So not just the murder rate, but the murder rate by gun. And what you'll notice is it looked like I dropped a bunch of sprinkles on the page. There's no correlation between gun ownership or ease of access to guns and homicide rates.
That is your time.
Okay. Anybody that's taken a basic statistics class knows that there are 3 types of lies: damn lies, and statistics. That's what I think that is.
Okay.
Let me explain why. Sorry. I have to First of all, can I see that?
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I can
yeah.
understand the data that you're.
Yeah, and this has the what's cited there. Yeah.
So I need more time to look at this chart, obviously. First of all, I just need to address the fact that this source, this source, this source, and this source, if I turned them in, I would have gotten an F in college because they're all from Wikipedia.
Okay. So, Chartgate there, right? So here's what happened. Spike had found some information. The information actually comes from a UN source. It just happened to have been presented nice and neatly on Wikipedia. He printed out the charts, and to his credit, he said, this is from an organization that is not pro-gun. And he just printed out these charts so that David could see that there's a lack of correlation when it comes to gun violence and gun ownership. As you know, as you saw very clearly, David, or listening, if you're just listening, David was not familiar with the data, which is fine. You know, I mean, there's sources and information out there that you might not be familiar with. But he starts off by saying, well, you know, there's lies, there's damn lies, and there's statistics. And then he says, well, let me see that so I know what I'm looking at. And he's like, well, I'll obviously have to look at this a little bit further. Okay, well then if you have to look at it further, then hush. Don't say anything else because you're not in a position to talk about it. But he decided to keep going. And then he gets into like, you know, oh, this is just Wikipedia. I would have got an F. Okay, number one, you're not in school. Okay, there's school and then there's the real world. Now in the real world, it is not necessarily a good idea to use Wikipedia as a reference. You will get laughed at. And we laughed at, like, if you saw the debate with Destiny and several other guys, he has been criticized multiple times, the streamer Destiny. He has been repeatedly criticized for appearing to get all his knowledge from reading Wikipedia articles. And there was a debate with him and some other guys. I didn't watch it, but it was like a 4-hour debate or something crazy. And one of the guys actually yells at him at one point. And he's like, look, you need to have a little bit of humility. All of us here, we've read like thousands of books, and you're over here reading Wikipedia articles thinking that you're able to challenge us on our knowledge of what we've read. Now, and so yes, the idea of Wikipedia as a source is not a good thing. But again, at the same time, that's not what Spike was doing. What Spike was doing, because he said it, he said so, and I don't have that specific moment, but he said so. This comes from the UN. It is not a pro-gun organization. What they've done is they grabbed gun statistics from all the different countries and put them together and put it on a chart. And then the chart wound up on Wikipedia, which is where I printed it from. So I think a little bit of humility on David's part is necessary. Like, okay, it's not that Spike was just like, well, it says here in this Wikipedia article, this, right? He's saying, here's the source of this information. And even though it happens to be on Wikipedia, because sometimes Wikipedia is just a nice place to go and find a collection of the data already, right? Like sometimes they've got it laid out pretty nice and neatly. They've got the charts, they got the graphs, the pictures, and whatever. So I think it's fine to go and grab information from Wikipedia, but we do need to be mindful about how we do it, so we don't open the door for someone to ridicule. And David, to his discredit, I think he would have been fine if he had just criticized it the one time and moved on, but then he kept doing it and going on, and he mentioned it multiple times as if it was a scandal, and it wasn't a scandal. Now, how do we deal with that, right? Well, the number one thing that I think Spike did that was very good, and I've done this myself, he found information that comes from a source that is not on his side. The best thing that, like, I don't want to say the best, one of the best things that you can do, a great thing that you can do, is to go and get information from a source that is not friendly to you. And if you can show somebody and say, hey, look, this source is more friendly to you, and the data that they have is saying what I'm trying to tell you, you're in a great position. To be in a better position would be to do that and then find a source that is more sympathetic to you. And then you can say, well, guess what? The source that's sympathetic to you and the source that's sympathetic to me have looked at the data and come to a very similar conclusion. What does that tell you? That tells you this is probably the truth or pretty darn close to it. So since Spike was what Spike was trying to point out was that when you look at the data, you actually see that it's all over. That's why I said, like, you're looking at this chart and it looks like a bunch of sprinkles on the page. What he's saying is you don't see any direction that the data is going in. You don't see a trend for the data. What you see is data here, data there, data here, and it's just all over the page. And so you can't necessarily say, well, guns, the fact that people have guns necessarily means that there's going to be more or less murder or homicide rates. And so to kind of bolster his point, so he used something that's sympathetic to David's side, and I'm going to use something that's more sympathetic to my side, and hopefully we'll hone in on the point. So I've got this book here, Intellectuals and Society. This is from Thomas Sowell. And if you've never read it, I highly recommend it. But I'm going to read a little excerpt from it because this bolsters the point that Spike was trying to make. So let me read it. It's not too terribly long, but I'm going to read it, and then I'll put a link to the book in the show notes so that you can yourself go and find it. So here's what it says. Rummaging through numbers can turn up statistical data consistent with a given vision, and rummaging through other numbers, or perhaps even the same numbers viewed or selected differently, can produce data consistent with the opposite vision. But only when numbers are in accord with the prevailing vision are they likely to be accepted uncritically without considering other statistics that tell a very different story. So in other words, he's saying, like, data can lead you to believe one thing, it can lead you to believe another thing. And you need to be critical about thinking about the data and say, okay, where could this data, how could this data present the opposite of what I'm trying to say? So he goes on, he says, for example, much of what is said about the effect of gun control on crime rates in general, or on the murder rate in particular, is based on what kinds of statistics are repeated endlessly, and what kinds of data seldom, if ever, reach the general public. It has, for example, been repeated endlessly in the media and in academia that Britain and various other countries with stronger gun control laws than those in the United States have murder rates that are only a fraction of the murder rate in the United States. The clear implication being that it is the gun control which accounts for the difference in murder rates. Having reached this conclusion, most of the intelligentsia have seen no reason to proceed further. And you notice that David Hogg did that. He said, well, look at Australia. It's the guns. And he said that phrase multiple times. It's the guns. It's the guns. It's the guns again. And that's exactly what he did. He reached a conclusion and went no further. All right, let's continue. But a serious attempt to test the hypothesis of an inverse relationship between restricted gun ownership and the murder rates would make other comparisons and other breakdowns of statistical data necessary. For example, number one, since we know that murder rates are lower in some countries with stronger gun laws than in the United States, are there other countries with stronger gun control laws than the United States that have higher murder rates? Number two, are there countries with widespread gun ownership which have lower murder rates than some other countries with lower gun ownership rates? Number three, did the murder rate differential between the United States and Britain originate with the onset of gun control laws? Those who are content to stop when they found the kinds of statistics they're looking for were unlikely to ask such questions. The answers to these three questions, incidentally, are yes, yes, and no. Russia and Brazil have tougher gun control laws than the United States and much higher murder rates. Gun ownership rates in Mexico are a fraction of what they are in the United States, but Mexico's murder rate is more than double that than in the United States. Handguns are banned in Luxembourg, but not in Belgium, France, or Germany. Yet the murder rate in Luxembourg is several times the murder rate in Belgium, France, or Germany. An international statistical study found that Switzerland, Israel, and New Zealand have relatively lax gun control laws and or high firearms availability, yet have homicide rates that differ little from those in England or Japan, which is to say, Homicide rates a fraction of those in the United States. New York City has had a murder rate some multiple of the murder rate in London for more than 2 centuries. And for most of those 2 centuries, neither place had serious gun control laws. Murders committed without guns have also been several times as high in New York as in London. Nevertheless, the fact that the murder rate in England is lower than that in the United States continues to be cited as proof that gun control laws reduce the murder rate. So there we have Thomas Sowell, and if you read the book, he has all of the sources cited at the very back. You can go and identify, what source that he has for each one of these statistics. He points out that when you really start looking at the data, when you start comparing, what you're going to find is that there are countries with higher rates of violence and lower rates of violence. And then there's also going to be within those countries, some of them will have higher rates of gun ownership and some of them will have lower rates of gun ownership. And there is no correlation to the rate of gun ownership, as Spike was saying. There's no correlation to gun ownership to homicide and murder rates. And then Thomas Sowell points out a very interesting thing is that when you compare New York City to London, and then you even compare them to themselves over time, that you see that the gun control when it was put into place is not when you started seeing a big difference between the two, that you actually saw it prior to gun control. So no, David was incorrect in the way that he took it. Spike was correct in what he was trying to say. It just so happened that he unfortunately used Wikipedia and that kind of got tossed out. Now, everybody on Spike's side probably understood exactly what Spike was trying to say and had no issue with it. But that doesn't matter. What matters is, what are the people who oppose you think? Are you getting through to them? Because Spike is speaking not to me. He's not trying to convince me. I'm already there. He's trying to convince people that are watching David Hogg who agree with David Hogg. And David Hogg is doing the opposite. He's not trying to speak to his crowd so much. I mean, both of them might be like, hey, I hope I can give a good nugget to people that, want to also have this debate. But more importantly, David is trying to speak to people like me and trying to convince me of his position. So in the essence of that, we need to be mindful about the data, how we present it, and the sources that we use, because we need to take away the simple and easy, the low hanging fruit, if you will, the simple and easy excuses that people will have to dismiss our arguments. So that's basically what it is. And in this particular case, I'm going to say that Spike was 100% correct in what he was trying to say. And he tried to say it. He was like, look, when you look at the data, and he's got multiple charts here, but then it just got dismissed because of, Wikipedia gate. All right. So let's move on to the next. I got 2 more clips here. All right. So let's see. That was Chartgate. This one is interesting. So the next 2 are going to be of David, and I'm not criticizing him per se. What I'm doing now is presenting what he has said and then saying, all right, how would we address this? So let's take a look at something he said.
I mean, like, the fact of the matter is, gun technology has vastly improved since that era. Semi-automatic rifles make up, like the AR-15, they make up 25% of all gun sales in this country at this point. Those guns are not made necessarily to defend yourself. They were originally developed from a variant of the M16 that was originally developed as part of a competition. I could go into the whole history of it, but it was made effectively for the US military. And those weapons are made for the jungles of Vietnam. They are not made necessarily to defend yourself. And frankly, if you're defending yourself with a rifle from 1,000 feet away, unless you're in a place that's really, it is hard to imagine really any compelling argument to why that's the case.
Okay, so it's actually not very hard to imagine any compelling case. And actually, I think the proper word would be convincing. But here's what's going on here. I think there's a misunderstanding of rifles. And we can laugh and be like, haha, you don't know what you're talking about, because a rifle could be used, it doesn't have to be 1,000 feet away. And I don't think he necessarily meant that 100% literally. What he's basically trying to say is, like, a rifle is a really good instrument for shooting at an enemy or a target that's at a distance, whatever that distance might be. And so he's trying to make this argument like, well, a rifle isn't so good in close quarters. But that's actually not even true. And we can show instances of how that is not true. So what I would do when somebody points that out, because he's like, well, I can, people that make this argument will say there's no reason to have an AR-15. You don't need it. It's not a proper weapon for close quarters. Well, that's actually not true, and we have evidence of it. So let me put up this here real quick. So this is a news story. It's from 2019, and pregnant woman uses AR-15 to fatally shoot armed intruder. 2 armed men broke into the house and pistol whipped her husband before the wife pulled out their legally possessed weapon and opened fire. So there were 2 men. They broke in. They got the jump on her husband. She's pregnant. She's like, and I think in the article it says like she's like 8 months pregnant or something like that. Let's see if I can find it here. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. The female homeowner. That's so weird. 8 months pregnant wife. So his wife is 8 months pregnant. Okay. I want you to think about this for a second. So the argument is, well, you don't really need a rifle because that's not an appropriate tool for your needs. Now, first and foremost, to the original point that Spike made, which says like, look, you have the right to self-defense. Me and virtually every other libertarian, well, let's leave it at that. Me and virtually every other libertarian are going to argue and say, I have the right to self-defense, and that right means I can use whatever instrument I feel is necessary. So therefore, I can choose to use a rock, my fist, a handgun, or a rifle. It doesn't really matter. It's not your job to determine what is most appropriate to me. But if we want to have the conversation about whether or not an AR-15 is appropriate, the reason that people like AR-15 is, 1, they're fun to shoot, and then number 2, they are that easy to use. Close combat or far away, if for some reason we're in the, our 8-month pregnant woman is in the jungles of Vietnam. Like it is that useful of a tool. So I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding that the rifle is not only for distance, but it has value even close. I mean, maybe not super close, like if the person's right there choking me, then I'm probably not going to find an AR-15 very, very useful at that particular moment. Pistol is going to be much more useful. But as we see here, this pregnant woman who is 8 months pregnant ran and grabbed an AR-15 and shot at an intruder, killed one, and I think she wounded the other. And I think he did get away. I don't remember the details of the story. But again, these kind of stories happen all the time. And I think it's worth pointing out to people, I don't think you understand how useful of a tool the AR-15 is. Now, yes, like it's kind of a weird argument that people say, well, guns are designed to kill. Like, yes, we all know that. That's the whole point of it, right? Going to target practice, that's like a side fun. And most people, like normal people who don't have an issue, like a mental issue, they don't want to use a firearm to kill another person. They may be willing to, but they don't want to. They would rather have and not need. That's the point. And the point here, just to kind of follow up with David, is again, an AR-15 is a very versatile tool. That's why people like it. It's very versatile. And it's easy to use. It's so easy to use that an 8-month pregnant woman who's under duress, watching her husband get beaten, pistol whipped with 2 male intruders, was able to go and grab it and defend her family. That's a very useful tool. Like I like if you're having trouble out there, David Hoggs of the world, just go and look up, go Google search AR-15 used in self-defense and just read all the different stories. There's stories of like kids that have done it, like in their early teens, right? Like not 17-year-old, like 12 and 13-year-old kids have used AR-15s to defend themselves or their family members. It is a very versatile tool. So I think and this is the point that the liberty community, we need to be prepared with these kind of stories, because we need to not only show the data and say, all right, here's what the data says in aggregate and whole, but here's also some anecdotal stories to kind of illustrate that I don't think you understand the versatile nature of the tool that you're criticizing. And so we need to have, again, this is a matter of being prepared to speak on multiple ends, on the data, and then just as a matter of experience and observation. All right, so let's move on from that. We've got one more clip here, and I think this was an interesting clip. So let's play this one.
So I think we need to address how somebody gets a gun and why they want to pick up a gun in the first place. Part of the challenge with this.
Okay, so I'm going to stop him right there. I don't really care so much why people want a gun. I mean, I understand what he's saying, because he's like, well, if you want a gun to do harm to people, then yeah, we want to know why. But in order to know that, you would have to know all the good reasons that people want to have a gun. And I don't think that's any of your business, right? It's just not your business. So I'm actually going to disagree with that, but that's not really the main point here.
Work is that Spike can talk all he wants about, individual instances of self-defense gun use. Because when that happens, it's on Fox News, it's on Breitbart, it's on every single damn news channel of the right. But the reality is it's impossible to talk about the shooting that didn't happen, like the one that could have happened to my mother, where if that man continued to be armed, I may have had to bury her.
Okay, so he's kind of making an appeal to emotion, and that's fine. No problem there. And I think he's correct. Like, hey, you need to talk about, from his perspective, what he's saying is, if somebody doesn't have a firearm, people like my mom, who might have otherwise been in danger, are now no longer in danger. And we're not having that conversation. We're not talking about all the times that people like my mom weren't killed by a deranged gun owner. But what I think he's missing is that it goes in the opposite direction as well. When people are armed, we don't have to talk about all the possible people that we had to bury because they weren't armed. So the argument goes in both ways. Like, he's looking at it and he's saying, well, had this person been armed, I might have been telling a very different story about my mom. Well, the same holds true in the flip. If this person wasn't armed, we might have been telling a very different story about them as well. And this is the point. And I know he criticized at one point the NRA and how many instances of self-defense. So think of it this way. And I don't remember I know it's usually like some millions or something like that, people say. So let's say that I come out and I go, 1 million instances of self-defense occur every year of with a firearm, self-defense with a firearm. That's 1 million people that might have been otherwise killed. And then the person goes, well, I think that number's too high. Okay. 500,000. Well, that's still too high. Oh, okay. 250,000. Well, that's still too high. I tell you what, 10,000 people every year have defended themselves against gun violence, potential violence with a gun, right? What is that worth to you? Now, the likelihood that it's not 1 million, sure. The likelihood that maybe it's double, maybe. But as we start getting down in the numbers, the likelihood that that number is incorrect becomes lower and lower and lower. So the likelihood that it's not 1 million, you can argue that. The likelihood that it's not 500,000, you could probably argue that too. But once we get to like 250,000, once we start getting to those numbers, now the person that's disagreeing, they're going to have, now that's the point where I'm going to say, look, I accepted that maybe my initial number was a little too high and I was willing to cut it in half. Now I've cut it in half again. It's a quarter of what it was. And I'm going to push back and I'm going to say, you need to now demonstrate to me why it is so off, because you can't just keep saying that's too high. That worked once or twice, but it's wore off now. You need to come back with some actual data on what the number really is, because I'm presenting to you based on somebody else's determination, however they made that determination, whatever studies that they did, or, however they extrapolated that information, right? I'm coming to you with this number, but even if it's inflated, there is a certain point where, nope, we're sticking to that number, right? So I could go all the way down to 10,000, and that would be a huge drop, right? And the numbers, if it were true, again, I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying if we went from 1 million to 10,000, that's a huge drop. And that would mean that somebody's really, really terrible at estimating information. But it also doesn't take away from the fact that 10,000 is a lot of people. It is a lot of people. And 10,000 people, if 10,000 people defended themselves against firearms every year, that is a number you cannot ignore under any circumstances. And that leads us to the point where we say, at what point do your policies start reducing the number of people that actually were able to defend themselves to people that could not defend themselves and might have been harmed? In other words, at what point do your policies cause people to be harmed in the name of hoping to protect somebody else? Because those 10,000 people that defend themselves, the greater majority, almost all of them, are going to be law-abiding citizens. The person that has, the person that is trying to harm them is not a law-abiding citizen. That not a law-abiding citizen, they don't care about your gun laws. So your gun laws are disproportionately affecting the law-abiding citizens. So even if it's 10,000, right, which I believe it's way higher than that, but even if it's only 10,000, your laws are going to affect more of the 10,000 people who could have potentially been harmed, who are law-abiding citizens, than they will affect of the people that tried to harm them. And so you're making more people defenseless. And since we're talking about people that are not law-abiding citizens, you may not solve the problem you're trying to solve in the first place, because those people are also are also not law-abiding citizens. The people that commit mass shootings, they are not law-abiding citizens. And there is a moment where they're law-abiding, maybe they have an idea, but then they cross over and they start breaking the law until the point where they've harmed one or more people. And if it stands to reason, if the people in the 10,000 self-defense scenario, if the people who aren't law-abiding in those situations are unaffected by gun control, then the people that that commit mass shootings are also not affected by gun control. It goes to both, because they're both the same group of people. Effectively, they are not law-abiding citizens. They are disregarding it. So the only person you're harming is the law-abiding citizen. So hopefully that makes sense to you. I hope I didn't create this weird, like difficult thing to understand. All I'm trying to point out is that there are a large number of people who defend themselves against criminal acts with firearms. And the people they defend themselves against are people who are the bad guys. And bad guys are bad guys, whether they're trying to harm the people that are law-abiding, gun-owning citizens, or whether they're trying to harm children in a school. Bad guys are bad guys. Son. They're bad guys are bad guys. And we need to treat them the same. Go get a towel, please. And in doing so, that's how we get to the best policies. But so long as people are focusing on one set of bad guys, they're going to ignore the other set of bad guys, which means they are ignoring the good guys. They're putting them in harm's way. So that's the point that I wanted to make here. And these are the kind of conversations that we need to have. We need to watch these kind of debates. We need to have these debates, and then we need to look at them with a critical eye and say, all right, what did this person say? Right? What did, and we have to be honest with ourselves. I think David made some fair points, because they're fair points not in that I agree, they're fair points in things that I need to address, things that you need to address. And the only way we can do that is to get away from the model of har har har, what a moron, he's dumb. Like, I get it, but he's also like a young kid. I'm 45. I've been studying way longer than him, right? I've been debating and arguing with people for way longer than him. Thank you, buddy. Here, just kind of clean it up, champ. Go ahead, do your thing. We had a little accident, folks. Somebody got a little excited. All right. So we need to pay attention to these kind of arguments, and then we need to figure out, all right, how can we address them? Right. It's not useful to us to just simply laugh and make fun of people. I get it. It's fun to dunk on somebody, but at the end of the day, a lot of these young people, we were once young people too. If you're an old like me, remember, we were once young. We had a lot of ideas, and some of them we still have, some of them we no longer have. And the reason that we no longer have them is because one of two things: either we were curious enough to find our way to the better ideas, or somebody helped bring us along. And so what we need to do as the older generation, and I'm speaking to the olds now, we need to use our experience and our wisdom that we've hopefully gained to help lead the younger crowd to the best ideas. Hopefully one day David Hogg will look back and say, thank you, bud. Hopefully he'll look back one day and say, you know what? I got it so wrong back then. And he'll say, and I'm glad that there were people that were patient despite me being, because when you're popular like he is, when you're getting big stages and you're young, you're going to be a little on the punchy side. And that's okay. I don't mind that. It's okay. It's our job as the older folks to be a little bit less punchy when necessary. Right? I mean, there's a time and place for things, but we have to keep focused that the best way to improve our society is to hear them out, hear out people that dissent, and then consider what they're saying, and then address what they're saying to the best of our ability in a way that they will receive it, not the way that I want to hear it. I may want to hear facts and figures. They may want to hear a sympathetic argument. They might want to hear an emotional argument. Well, have that ready. Maybe they want to hear a factual argument based in data. Okay, we'll have that ready too. Whatever the case may be. All right, folks, we got a little mess here, so I'm going to have to go and clean up. I want to thank you for watching. That actually ends my show anyway, so it's not like, perfect timing, I guess. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show and got something out of it. I hope you found it informative and inspiring. I want you to be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Tomorrow's show is looking to be exciting. I'm going to bring a guest on, and we're going to do something a little unique. So look forward to that, folks. Be sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel. Go to youtube.libertydad.com, or if you prefer, you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you are there, please leave me a comment. Let me know how I'm doing. Last but not least, I want you to remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.